I'm Amelia, 26 years old, and my sister Francesca just shattered my world with 8 words I'll never forget. We grew up sharing everything: clothes, secrets, dreams of our future weddings where we'd be each other's maid of honor. When she got engaged to wealthy businessman Harrison Worthington, I was already mentally shopping for my bridesmaid dress and planning her bachelorette party. I'd been saving every penny from my teaching salary for months to throw her the celebration she deserved. Then, 3 weeks before her lavish ceremony at the Grand Rosewood Estate, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Amelia, you can't come to my wedding. It's about the look, and honestly, you'd ruin the aesthetic." So I did something that shocked our entire family in Willowbrook. I booked a solo trip to Thailand instead and posted the most stunning photos of my life right during her reception. When those images went viral and overshadowed her carefully curated wedding content, her furious voicemail started flooding my phone. But before I tell you how a plain, younger sister accidentally became an influencer and taught a beauty-obsessed family the real meaning of radiance, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the picture-perfect suburb of Willowbrook, nestled in the rolling hills outside Richmond, Francesca was the golden child who could do no wrong. For years my senior, she possessed that effortless beauty that photographers dream of: cascading auburn waves, emerald eyes that sparkled like precious gems, and cheekbones so sharp they could cut glass. Our mother, Delphine, a former pageant queen turned real estate mogul, would spend hours styling Francesca's hair and teaching her makeup techniques from the time she was barely 12. Meanwhile, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, nose buried in adventure novels, completely content in my own little world of imagination and discovery. Our father, Theodore, owned the most successful law firm in 3 counties and treated Francesca like a precious porcelain doll, constantly praising her appearance and grace. "My beautiful princess," he'd call her, twirling her around the marble foyer of our colonial mansion. When it came to me, the compliments focused on different qualities: "Amelia's so smart," or "Amelia has such a kind heart," which, even as a child, I understood were consolation prizes. The unspoken message was crystal clear: Francesca was the beauty, and I was everything else. The divide became more pronounced as we entered our teenage years. Francesca transformed into Willowbrook High's undisputed queen, crowned homecoming royalty 3 years running, dating the captain of the lacrosse team, and gracing the cover of our local lifestyle magazine twice before graduation. Her bedroom became a shrine to her social success, walls covered with photos from charity galas, debutante balls, and exclusive parties where she rubbed shoulders with the county's elite families. She had a natural magnetism that drew people to her like moths to a flame, and she wore her beauty like armor, protecting her from any criticism or consequence. I, on the other hand, remained what our great-aunt Cordelia diplomatically called a late bloomer. My mousy brown hair refused to hold any style for more than an hour, my skin waged constant war against hormonal breakouts, and my bookish tendencies meant I spent more time in the library than at social gatherings. While Francesca learned the art of sophisticated conversation at country club luncheons, I was volunteering at the animal shelter and tutoring struggling students in mathematics. Our paths diverged so dramatically that by senior year, we barely spoke unless family obligations forced us together. The subtle cruelty began around this time, delivered with Francesca's signature sweet smile that made it impossible to call out her behavior without seeming oversensitive. "Amelia, honey, maybe try some concealer for those breakouts before family photos," she'd suggest while adjusting her own flawless complexion in the hallway mirror. Or during family dinners, "Amelia's going through that awkward phase where she doesn't quite know how to dress for her body type yet." Each comment felt like a tiny paper cut, individually manageable, but collectively creating a wound that never quite healed. Our parents, blinded by their pride in Francesca's achievements and social status, never recognized the pattern. When relatives would comment on our obvious differences, mother would wave them off with, "The girls are just finding their own paths, that's all." What she couldn't see was how those innocent observations reinforced a hierarchy that positioned me as permanently second best, destined to live in the shadow of my sister's luminous presence. After graduation, Francesca moved to Manhattan to pursue a career in fashion public relations, landing a coveted position at Sterling and Associates, the firm that represented A-list celebrities and luxury brands. Her Instagram account became a carefully curated gallery of exclusive events, designer outfits, and glamorous friendships with models and socialites. She dated investment bankers, tech entrepreneurs, and even a minor television actor whose face appeared on billboards throughout Times Square. Meanwhile, I chose a quieter path, earning my education degree from the State University and returning home to teach 4th grade at Willowbrook Elementary. The salary was modest, but I found deep satisfaction in nurturing young minds and helping children discover their own unique talents. My social media presence consisted mainly of classroom projects and weekend hiking adventures with my rescue dog, a scruffy golden retriever mix named Buster who had more personality in his left ear than most people possessed in their entire beings. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance, where I perfected the art of gracious deflection. Cousin Beatrice would inevitably ask, "Still no boyfriend, Amelia?" while gushing over Francesca's latest romantic conquest. Uncle Reginald would joke about how I'd inherited all the brains, while Francesca got all the beauty, as if these were mutually exclusive traits distributed by some cosmic lottery system. I learned to smile and change the subject, swallowing the sting of being consistently reduced to a supporting character in my own family's narrative. What I didn't realize was that I was about to become the protagonist of my own incredible story. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before the beauty competitions and social hierarchies tore us apart, Francesca and I were inseparable in the way that only sisters sharing childhood secrets can be. Our sprawling Victorian home on Magnolia Lane had endless hiding spots, a dusty attic filled with grandmother's vintage trunks, a wraparound porch perfect for whispered conversations, and a massive oak tree in the backyard that became our fortress against the world. In those early years, before anyone told us we were supposed to be different, we were simply two little girls who shared everything from bubble baths to midnight cookie raids. I remember Francesca at 7 years old, her auburn hair still refusing to behave despite mother's best efforts, teaching me how to French braid using her favorite porcelain doll, Evangeline. We'd spend entire Saturday mornings in our shared bedroom, she patiently showing me the intricate weaving technique while I fumbled with clumsy fingers. "It's okay, Mimi," she'd say, using the nickname only she was allowed to call me, "practice makes perfect. Look, I'll show you again." Her patience seemed infinite then, her attention completely focused on making sure I succeeded. During those golden summers when I was 5 and she was 9, Francesca appointed herself my protector and guide through the complex social waters of childhood. When the Pemberton twins, notorious bullies from Elm Street, cornered me at the neighborhood pool and called me Bucktooth because of my prominent front teeth, Francesca materialized like an avenging angel. "Nobody talks to my sister that way," she declared, her small hands planted firmly on her hips, emerald eyes blazing with protective fury. The twins, despite being 2 years older than her, actually backed down. Francesca had already developed that commanding presence that would serve her so well in later years, but back then, she used it entirely for my benefit. Our bedtime ritual was sacred and elaborate. After father finished reading us stories downstairs, always tales of brave princesses and magical adventures, Francesca would sneak into my room for what we called sister time. She'd brush my tangled hair with gentle strokes, humming lullabies she'd learned from our grandmother Vivian, while I shared my elaborate dreams about becoming a veterinarian who could talk to animals or a teacher who made learning feel like magic. "You're going to do amazing things, Mimi," she'd whisper as I drifted off to sleep, "and I'll be there cheering you on every step of the way." The memory that still makes my heart ache happened during my 7th birthday party. Mother had planned an elaborate princess-themed celebration in our backyard, complete with a bouncy castle and face-painting station. But 20 minutes before guests arrived, a summer storm erupted with the fury that only Virginia thunderstorms can muster. Rain pounded against our windows while lightning illuminated the afternoon sky, turning our outdoor wonderland into a soggy disappointment. I burst into tears, convinced my birthday was ruined, that nobody would want to come to a party trapped indoors. Francesca, only 11 but already possessing wisdom beyond her years, took charge with the determination of a military general. "Emergency sister meeting," she announced, dragging me upstairs while mother frantically called parents about the weather situation. In our bedroom, she unveiled her hastily conceived backup plan, we'd transform our space into the most magical indoor kingdom any of our friends had ever seen. Using every blanket, sheet, and throw pillow in the house, we constructed an elaborate fort system that connected both our beds, complete with fairy lights she'd borrowed from Mother's Christmas decorations and a throne room constructed from our desk chairs draped in her prettiest scarves. When my friends arrived, soaked from the rain but giggling with excitement, they discovered a wonderland that far exceeded any outdoor party we could have imagined. Francesca had convinced Father to move our small television into the fort so we could watch Disney movies, and she'd raided the kitchen to create a feast of childhood favorites: peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into star shapes, chocolate milk served in fancy teacups, and a trail mix she'd assembled from various cereals and candy. She spent the entire afternoon entertaining my friends with elaborate stories and games, never once acting like she was too old or too sophisticated for our childish delights. "This is the best birthday ever," my friend Lily proclaimed while we all huddled together in our blanket kingdom, and I felt a surge of pure love for my sister who had transformed disaster into magic through sheer force of will and creativity. Francesca caught my eye across the fort and winked, her smile radiant with the simple joy of making her little sister happy. Those Sunday mornings when our parents slept late remain some of my most treasured memories. Francesca would wake me before dawn, and we'd tiptoe downstairs to the kitchen like conspirators planning the world's most important mission. She'd boost me up on the counter so I could reach the pancake mix while she gathered eggs and milk, and together we'd create breakfast feasts that rivaled anything our housekeeper Mrs. Holloway could produce. Inevitably, we'd make a tremendous mess: flour handprints on the cabinets, syrup somehow ending up in impossible places, and pancakes that looked more like abstract art than food, but the laughter that filled our kitchen during those stolen hours was pure gold. Francesca would tell me stories about the adventures we'd have when we grew up, elaborate tales of traveling the world together, starting our own business, or living in neighboring houses so our children could grow up as close as we were. "We'll always be best friends," she'd promise while flipping a pancake that resembled a lopsided butterfly. "No matter what happens, it'll always be you and me against the world, Mimi." In those moments, with flour in our hair and syrup on our fingers, the future seemed infinite and beautiful, filled with endless possibilities for two sisters who loved each other more than anything else in the world. I held on to those memories like lifelines during the years that followed, never imagining that the very sister who once defended me against playground bullies would eventually become the one I needed protection from. The transformation began subtly during the summer Francesca turned 13, like watching a butterfly emerge from its cocoon, except this metamorphosis felt more like watching my best friend disappear into someone I barely recognized. It started with small changes that seemed innocent enough: Francesca spending more time in front of her vanity mirror, experimenting with lip gloss she'd convinced Mother to buy during their monthly shopping trips to Richmond's upscale Westfield Mall. She began sleeping in hair rollers despite the discomfort, determined to achieve the perfect waves she'd seen on magazine covers. The catalyst was Francesca's acceptance into Willowbrook's elite junior cotillion program, a prestigious social training ground where wealthy families prepared their daughters for high society debut balls. Only 12 girls from the entire county were selected each year, and competition was fierce among the established families who viewed cotillion as essential preparation for their daughters' future roles as proper Southern ladies. Mother had applied months in advance, submitting photographs and academic records as if Francesca were auditioning for a leading role in the most important production of her life. When the acceptance letter arrived on embossed cream-colored stationery, our house erupted in celebration. Father opened a bottle of champagne typically reserved for major legal victories. Mother immediately called her sister Evangeline in Charleston to share the news, and Francesca glowed with a pride I'd never seen before. The cotillion would require weekly etiquette lessons, ballroom dancing instruction, and participation in various charity events throughout the fall season, culminating in the Christmas debutante ball where she'd be formally presented to society. As Francesca immersed herself in this new world of white gloves and proper curtsy techniques, I began to feel like a relic from her childhood that no longer fit into her increasingly sophisticated life. Our Saturday morning adventures became less frequent as her schedule filled with cotillion activities, tennis lessons at the country club, and shopping expeditions for the perfect wardrobe to match her new social status. She started speaking differently too, adopting the refined accent and vocabulary she learned from her etiquette instructor, Mrs. Pemberton Clark, a formidable woman who'd trained debutantes for 3 decades. The first comment that should have served as a warning came during one of Mother's dinner parties in early September. Francesca had spent 2 hours preparing for the evening, emerging from her room in a navy blue dress with pearl accessories that made her look at least 16 despite being barely 13. As prominent Willowbrook families gathered in our formal dining room, discussing business ventures and social gossip over Mother's famous herb-crusted lamb, I felt increasingly invisible in my simple sundress and scuffed sandals. When Mrs. Whitman, wife of the bank president, complimented Francesca's appearance and asked about her cotillion experiences, my sister launched into an animated description of her recent charity luncheon at the governor's mansion. "Amelia should start thinking about these things too," Mrs. Whitman suggested kindly, turning her attention to me with genuine warmth. "Perhaps she could join the junior program next year?" Francesca's laugh tinkled like crystal wind chimes, but something cold flickered in her emerald eyes. "Oh, Amelia's more interested in her books and animals than social events," she said with what appeared to be sisterly affection but felt like dismissal. "She's not really the cotillion type, are you, Mimi? She prefers her hiking boots to high heels." The adults chuckled appreciatively at what they perceived as charming sibling differences, but I felt a small crack form in my heart, the first fracture in our previously unshakable bond. As autumn progressed, these subtle exclusions became more frequent and pointed. Francesca would discuss cotillion activities in front of me using language and references I couldn't understand, effectively creating a barrier between her new experiences and my everyday world. When I expressed interest in learning ballroom dancing, she wrinkled her nose thoughtfully. "Dancing requires a certain natural grace, Mimi. Maybe you should focus on activities that suit your strengths better. Like that science club you mentioned?" The physical changes were equally dramatic and distancing. Francesca's body developed with the kind of elegant proportions that fashion magazines celebrate, while I remained stubbornly childlike in appearance despite being only 3 years younger. She began receiving attention from older boys at school, phone calls that sent her giggling into private conversations behind her closed bedroom door. Meanwhile, I was still building elaborate cities with my extensive Lego collection and reading fantasy novels about brave heroines who save kingdoms through intelligence and determination rather than beauty. Mother's response to Francesca's transformation was pure delight tinged with vicarious satisfaction. Having been a beauty queen herself during her college years at the University of Virginia, she recognized Francesca's potential and began investing serious time and money in developing what she called her natural gifts. Professional makeup lessons replaced our amateur experimentation sessions, and Francesca's wardrobe expanded to include designer pieces carefully selected to enhance her increasingly sophisticated image. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner at our house, with extended family gathered around our antique mahogany table laden with crystal and silver that had been passed down through Mother's family for generations. Cousin Penelope, visiting from her boarding school in Connecticut, spent the entire meal complimenting Francesca's transformation and discussing fashion trends with the expertise of someone twice her age. When the conversation turned to holiday plans, Penelope mentioned an exclusive New Year's Eve party hosted by her school friend's family in Manhattan. "Francesca simply must come," Penelope declared with the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "The guest list is absolutely divine, all the right families, and several boys from Exeter and Groton will be there. It would be perfect for expanding her social circle." She glanced at me briefly before adding, "Of course, it's really more of an older crowd. Probably not suitable for younger children." Francesca's eyes lit up with excitement at the prospect of such grown-up sophistication, and I watched her mentally calculating how this invitation could elevate her social status even further. "That sounds absolutely wonderful," Mother interjected before Francesca could respond. "What an incredible opportunity for networking and cultural refinement." For the first time in our lives, I wasn't automatically included in Francesca's plans. The invitation was specifically for her alone, recognition of her emerging status as someone worthy of exclusive social circles. As the adults continued discussing travel arrangements and appropriate attire for such an important event, I felt myself shrinking into invisibility, relegated to the children's table of life despite sitting among the grown-ups. That evening, as Francesca excitedly tried on potential outfits for her Manhattan debut, calling Mother and Aunt Evangeline for fashion advice, I realized that my sister was no longer the girl who had once built blanket forts to save my birthday party. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone beautiful, sophisticated, and increasingly out of my reach. The golden past we'd shared was officially over, replaced by a new reality where we occupied completely different worlds within the same house. The toxic pattern that would define the next decade of our relationship established itself gradually but relentlessly, like water slowly eroding stone until the foundation crumbles. What started as occasional thoughtless comments during Francesca's cotillion phase evolved into a systematic undermining of my confidence that was so skillfully executed, even I began to believe the narrative she was weaving about my place in our family hierarchy. By the time Francesca entered Willowbrook Preparatory Academy as a freshman, her reputation as the most promising young socialite in 3 counties was firmly established. She moved through the hallways of our town's most prestigious private school like visiting royalty, surrounded by a carefully curated circle of friends whose families owned the largest estates, finest horses, and most successful businesses in Virginia's horse country. Her academic performance was respectable enough to satisfy our parents' expectations, but her real education was happening in the social sphere where she learned to navigate complex relationships with the strategic precision of a chess grandmaster. Meanwhile, I remained at Willowbrook Elementary, where my reputation as the smart one provided some protection but also served as a constant reminder that intelligence was my consolation prize for lacking Francesca's natural magnetism. My teachers praised my academic achievements and leadership qualities when I organized successful fundraisers for the animal shelter or tutored struggling classmates in mathematics, but these accomplishments felt hollow when compared to the breathless excitement that surrounded Francesca's latest social conquests. The comments became more frequent and more surgical in their precision, delivered with such apparent concern for my well-being that questioning them seemed ungrateful and oversensitive. During family breakfast one morning, as I enthusiastically described my selection as captain of our school's academic bowl team, Francesca listened with the patient expression of someone humoring a child's innocent delusions. "That's wonderful, Mimi," she said while carefully applying lip gloss using her reflection in the antique silver coffee pot. "Academic competitions are perfect for girls who aren't comfortable in more social situations. You've always been better with books than people anyway." Her tone suggested this was a biological fact rather than a character assessment, delivered with the same casual certainty she might use to comment on my brown eyes or average height. Mother nodded approvingly without really listening, already distracted by reviewing Francesca's schedule for an upcoming charity horse show where she'd be modeling riding attire for the county's most exclusive boutique. Father barely looked up from his legal briefs, long accustomed to treating our conversations as pleasant background noise to his more important professional concerns. The lack of contradiction from our parents transformed Francesca's observation into family truth, another piece of evidence supporting the growing consensus about my limitations. These character assassinations became more sophisticated as Francesca's social intelligence developed. During holiday gatherings, she would share carefully edited stories about my experiences that highlighted my social awkwardness while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. "Poor Mimi had such a difficult time at the school dance," she'd tell assembled relatives with apparently genuine sympathy. "She spent the entire evening hiding in the library because she was too nervous to talk to any boys. But that's just her personality, she's always been more comfortable with books than people." The fact that I had actually enjoyed myself at the dance, spending time with friends who shared my interests rather than desperately seeking male validation, became irrelevant under Francesca's interpretation. Her version of events painted me as socially deficient rather than contentedly independent, transforming my authentic choices into evidence of personal failure. The relatives would make sympathetic noises while shooting concerned glances in my direction, wondering what could be done to help such a painfully shy child develop normal social skills. As I entered middle school and Francesca established herself as Willowbrook Prep's undisputed social queen, the psychological warfare escalated into direct attacks on my appearance and self-worth. She developed an arsenal of seemingly helpful suggestions delivered with the authority of someone who clearly understood beauty standards better than anyone else in our family. "Mimi, honey, have you considered trying a different hairstyle?" she'd ask while examining my reflection in her bedroom mirror with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. "Something that works better with your face shape?" I could ask my stylist for recommendations, though she specializes more in working with naturally pretty features. These sessions would typically occur when I was feeling particularly vulnerable, after a difficult day at school, during the hormonal chaos of early adolescence, or when I was already questioning my appearance due to the normal insecurities of growing up. Francesca had developed an uncanny ability to sense these moments of weakness and strike with precision timing that maximized the emotional damage while maintaining the facade of sisterly concern. The clothing interventions were particularly devastating because they combined public humiliation with private shame. Francesca would offer to share her extensive wardrobe during family events, presenting the gesture as generous sisterly support while ensuring that everything she selected emphasized my physical shortcomings. The dresses that made her look like a Hollywood starlet transformed me into an awkward child playing dress-up in adult clothing, the proportions all wrong for my developing body and personal style. Maybe something more age-appropriate, she'd suggest after watching me struggle with a sophisticated cocktail dress that hung on my frame like an expensive sack. Or perhaps we should find styles that are more forgiving of different body types. Her alternatives inevitably came from the back of her closet, outdated pieces in unflattering colors that she'd grown tired of wearing, items that ensured I looked like her poor relation rather than her beloved sister. Our parents remained oblivious to this systematic campaign of psychological destruction, interpreting Francesca's behavior as admirable big sister mentorship rather than recognizing the calculated cruelty beneath her helpful exterior. When I occasionally protested or expressed hurt feelings, their response was predictably dismissive. "Francesca's only trying to help you develop better social skills," Mother would explain with the patience of someone clarifying obvious facts to a confused child. "You should be grateful to have such a stylish sister willing to share her expertise." The most painful aspect of this period wasn't the individual incidents of humiliation, but the gradual erosion of my sense of self-worth and the growing belief that Francesca's assessment of my limitations was accurate. I began avoiding social situations not because I was naturally introverted, but because I had internalized her messaging about my social inadequacy. I stopped expressing opinions about fashion or beauty because I had accepted her authority in these areas as unquestionable. By the time Francesca graduated from Willowbrook Prep as valedictorian, homecoming queen, and recipient of the prestigious Daughters of the American Revolution Scholarship, I had learned to make myself invisible during family celebrations of her achievements. Standing in her shadow had become so natural that I forgot I had ever cast my own light, accepting my role as the forgettable supporting character in the ongoing drama of Francesca's brilliant life. The foundation had been laid for years of diminished expectations and accepted limitations, all disguised as loving family dynamics that nobody outside our inner circle would ever question or challenge. The phone call that would change everything came on a crisp October evening while I was grading fourth-grade spelling tests in my cozy apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery on Elm Street. The scent of tomorrow's cinnamon rolls drifted up through the floorboards, mixing with the vanilla candle I'd lit to create the perfect atmosphere for my quiet Tuesday night routine. Buster lay sprawled across my feet, his golden fur warm against my slippers, occasionally twitching as he chased dream rabbits through fields I envied him for accessing so easily. My phone buzzed with Francesca's photo, a professional headshot from her latest corporate directory that made her look like she belonged on the cover of Forbes rather than in my contact list. We'd spoken perhaps 6 times in the past year, brief conversations that felt more like obligation than connection, so her call at 9:30 on a weeknight immediately set my nerves on edge. Had something happened to our parents? Was she in some kind of trouble that required my help? Mimi. Her voice practically sparkled through the speaker, effervescent with excitement that reminded me of our childhood Christmas mornings when anticipation made everything feel magical. "I have the most incredible news, and you're the first person I wanted to tell." The declaration should have warmed my heart, evidence that our bond still meant something despite years of growing distance, but something in her tone felt performative, like she was reading lines from a script rather than sharing genuine emotion. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my red correction pen and giving her my full attention for what felt like the first time in months. Buster lifted his head, sensing the shift in my energy, his brown eyes reflecting concern that mirrored my own growing unease. "Harrison proposed." The words exploded from her like champagne from a shaken bottle, followed by a squeal of delight that probably disturbed her Manhattan neighbors 3 floors in every direction. "Can you believe it? We're getting married, Mimi. I'm going to be Mrs. Harrison Worthington." Harrison Worthington III, scion of a family whose wealth stretched back to railroad fortunes and steel manufacturing, had been dating Francesca for 18 months with the kind of deliberate courtship that suggested marriage had always been the inevitable conclusion. Their relationship played out like a carefully choreographed performance across social media platforms, each post more glamorous than the last, weekend retreats to the Hamptons, charity galas where they looked like they'd stepped from the pages of Town and Country magazine, intimate dinners at restaurants that required reservations booked months in advance. "That's amazing," I managed, injecting enthusiasm into my voice while my heart performed complicated gymnastics somewhere between genuine happiness for my sister and inexplicable dread about what this development might mean for our already fragile relationship. Tell me everything. How did he propose? Where? When? Francesca launched into an elaborate narrative that sounded like it had been crafted by a team of romance novelists working in collaboration with a luxury travel magazine. Harrison had arranged a surprise weekend in Paris, ostensibly for a friend's art gallery opening but actually as the setting for the most elaborate proposal in Worthington family history. He'd reserved the entire top floor of the Hotel Plaza Athene, transformed the space into a winter wonderland despite the October timing, complete with white orchids flown in from Thailand and a string quartet that had performed at 3 royal weddings. As she described the 4-carat emerald-cut diamond that had belonged to Harrison's great-grandmother, a suffragette who'd scandalously married for love rather than social advancement, I found myself genuinely moved by the romance of it all. Whatever my complicated feelings about Francesca's transformation over the years, she deserved happiness, and Harrison seemed genuinely devoted to her in ways that transcended mere social convenience. The ring is absolutely perfect, she continued, and I could hear her moving around what I imagined was their elegantly appointed apartment, probably admiring the way light caught the diamond from different angles. Harrison had it reset in platinum with additional stones around the band. The original setting was beautiful but very 1920s, you know? This feels more timeless, more me. For 20 minutes, I listened to details about the proposal, the restaurant where they'd celebrated afterward, Harrison's emotional speech about finding his soulmate, and the flood of congratulations from their sophisticated circle of friends who'd apparently suspected the engagement was imminent. Francesca's happiness was infectious, and despite everything that had happened between us, I felt a surge of protective love for the sister who had once been my closest confidant and greatest ally. So when's the wedding? I asked, already mentally calculating how much I could save from my teaching salary to contribute to what would undoubtedly be the social event of the year in Willowbrook's elite circles. Please tell me you're not planning one of those 18-month engagements where the stress drives everyone crazy. Actually, we're thinking spring, Francesca said, her voice taking on the organized efficiency that had served her so well in her public relations career. May 15th, specifically. Harrison's family has connections at the Grand Rosewood Estate, you know, that gorgeous venue outside Charlottesville where the governor's daughter got married last year. They had a cancellation, and we can get the date if we move quickly. The Grand Rosewood Estate was legendary in Virginia's social circles, a sprawling antebellum mansion surrounded by manicured gardens that provided the perfect backdrop for weddings that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Magazine photographers fought for access to events held there, and having a rosewood wedding was considered the ultimate status symbol among families who measured success by how many times their celebrations appeared in society publications. That sounds absolutely perfect, I said, already envisioning myself in a bridesmaid dress, probably something in the blush pink or sage green that seemed to be trending in bridal magazines. I can't wait to help with planning. Do you want me to research photographers? Or maybe I could handle some of the vendor coordination since I have more flexible hours then. Actually, Mimi, Francesca interrupted, her voice shifting into a tone I recognized from childhood, the careful modulation she used when delivering news she knew would be difficult to hear. That's something I wanted to discuss with you. The wedding planning, I mean. Something cold settled in my stomach, a premonition that made Buster lift his head again and press closer against my legs as if sensing approaching danger. What do you mean? Well, Harrison and I have been talking about the vision for our day, she continued, each word chosen with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. We're going for a very specific aesthetic, elegant, sophisticated, timeless. The kind of wedding that could be featured in Vogue or Town and Country. Everything needs to be absolutely perfect, down to the smallest detail. I waited for her to continue, my pen suspended over a spelling test that suddenly seemed like the most important document in the world, anything to focus on besides the growing certainty that this conversation was about to shatter something fundamental between us. The thing is, Francesca said, her voice taking on that familiar tone of helpful concern that had accompanied so many devastating observations over the years, weddings like this are really about the overall look, the visual story we're telling. Every element has to work together harmoniously, the venue, the flowers, the music, and yes, the people in the photographs that will be treasured for generations. The words hung in the air between us like a blade waiting to fall, and I knew with absolute certainty that my childhood dreams of standing beside my sister on the most important day of her life were about to be destroyed by 8 words that would echo in my heart for years to come. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the distant hum of traffic on Elm Street and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I could hear Francesca breathing on the other end of the line, perhaps gathering courage for what she needed to say next, or maybe savoring the moment before she delivered the blow that would fundamentally alter our relationship forever. "What I'm trying to say, Mimi," she finally continued, her voice taking on that practiced sweetness I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign, "is that Harrison and I have decided to keep the wedding party very small and very curated. We're only having his sister Vivian as maid of honor, and his 2 best friends from Harvard as groomsmen. It's going to be intimate, sophisticated, just the absolute closest people in our lives." The words hit me like a physical assault, each syllable carefully chosen to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. I wasn't even being considered for the wedding party, not as a bridesmaid, not as a lesser attendant, not even as someone worthy of standing at the altar where we'd once promised to support each other through life's biggest moments. "But Francesca," I managed, my voice smaller than I intended, "we always talked about being in each other's weddings. Remember when we were little, how we used to plan?" "Mimi, please don't make this harder than it already is," she interrupted with a sigh that suggested I was being unreasonably emotional about a perfectly logical decision. "This isn't about childhood fantasies. This is about creating the perfect day, the kind of wedding that represents who Harrison and I are as a couple. Everything needs to be flawless, cohesive, magazine-worthy." I felt something break inside my chest, a crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. 22 years of being sisters, of shared secrets and whispered dreams, reduced to aesthetic concerns and social calculations. "Are you saying I'm not good enough to stand up with you at your own wedding?" "That's not what I'm saying at all," Francesca replied with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused child. "I'm saying that weddings like ours require a certain presentation. The photos will be seen by everyone who matters in Harrison's business circles, published in society magazines, preserved for posterity. Every detail has to be perfect, including the visual composition of the wedding party." The cruelty was breathtaking in its efficiency. Without explicitly calling me ugly or unsuitable, Francesca had made it clear that my appearance would somehow taint the perfection of her special day. I was being excluded not for any personal failing or relationship conflict, but simply because I didn't meet her aesthetic standards for what a proper Worthington wedding should look like. "But I'll still be invited as a guest, right?" I asked, hating the pleading tone that had crept into my voice but unable to stop myself from grasping for whatever connection might still be possible. "I mean, I'm still your sister. Surely I can attend the ceremony?" Another pause, this one even more ominous than the first. When Francesca spoke again, her voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Actually, Mimi, that's the other thing I wanted to discuss with you. The guest list is incredibly restricted, only 150 people, which sounds like a lot but really isn't when you consider Harrison's family connections and business obligations. We're having to make some very difficult choices about who to include." The implication hung between us like poison gas, slowly suffocating what remained of my hope. My own sister was telling me that I might not even be invited to witness the most important day of her life because our family connection wasn't valuable enough to justify using one of her precious invitation slots. "Francesca," I whispered, my voice breaking on her name, "what are you really saying? Are you uninviting me from your wedding?" "I'm saying that Harrison and I need to prioritize guests who are important to our future together," she replied with the clinical detachment of someone discussing seating arrangements rather than destroying a relationship. "Business associates, family friends who've been significant in our lives, people who can contribute meaningfully to our social and professional network. You have to understand, this isn't just a party, it's a strategic social event that will impact Harrison's career and our position in society." The words landed like physical blows, each one confirming what I'd suspected but never wanted to believe, that I had become irrelevant in Francesca's carefully curated life. My teacher's salary, my modest apartment, my preference for hiking boots over high heels, all of these things had disqualified me from participating in her transformation into Manhattan high society. "Besides," she continued, warming to her theme with the enthusiasm of someone who'd convinced herself she was being helpful. Wouldn't you be more comfortable anyway? I mean, these events can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to that level of formality and sophistication. The guest list includes ambassadors, Fortune 500 CEOs, celebrities you'd recognize from magazine covers. You might feel out of place trying to make conversation with people from such different backgrounds. The patronizing concern in her voice was almost worse than outright cruelty would have been. She was packaging my exclusion as a kindness, protecting me from the discomfort of being exposed to a world where I supposedly didn't belong. The sister who had once defended me against playground bullies was now the one delivering the most devastating blow to my self-worth. "So that's it then," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. 26 years of being sisters, and I don't even merit an invitation to your wedding because I'm not pretty enough or successful enough to fit your image. Don't be dramatic, Mimi, Francesca sighed with the exasperation of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. This has nothing to do with you personally. It's about the practicalities of planning a high-profile social event. Maybe we can have dinner together the week after the wedding, just the two of us, and I can show you all the photos. Wouldn't that be nice? The casual dismissal was stunning in its completeness. She was offering me leftover scraps from her perfect day, a consolation prize dinner where I could admire photographs of an event I wasn't worthy to attend. The message was crystal clear: I could remain in her life as long as I accepted my role as the lesser sister, the one who celebrated her achievements from a safe distance where my inadequacies wouldn't contaminate her success. "I need to go," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Congratulations on your engagement, Francesca. I hope you have the perfect wedding you're planning." "Mimi, please don't be upset," she said, but her tone suggested she was already moving on to more important concerns. "This is just how these things work in Harrison's world. You'll understand when you're older and more experienced with." I hung up before she could finish the sentence, my hands shaking as I set the phone down on my coffee table next to the forgotten spelling tests. Buster immediately climbed into my lap, his warm weight a comfort against the coldness spreading through my chest. For several minutes, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Then, with sudden clarity that felt like stepping out of fog into brilliant sunlight, I knew exactly what I needed to do. If I wasn't good enough for Francesca's perfect wedding, then I would create my own perfect day, one that had nothing to do with her aesthetic standards or social expectations, one that would remind me who I was before she convinced me I wasn't enough. I opened my laptop and began searching for flights to Thailand, my heart pounding with the first genuine excitement I'd felt in years. The decision crystallized with startling clarity as I stared at my laptop screen, cursor hovering over flight booking websites while Buster's steady breathing provided a comforting rhythm against my racing thoughts. For 26 years, I had lived my life according to other people's expectations, first trying to measure up to Francesca's effortless beauty, then accepting the role of the smart but plain sister that my family had assigned me. But sitting in my cozy apartment with tear stains on my cheeks and the echo of my sister's casual cruelty still ringing in my ears, I felt something shift fundamentally inside me. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion in a wedding where I clearly wasn't wanted. I wasn't going to spend the next 7 months watching Francesca's social media posts about dress fittings and venue preparations, knowing that every detail was being planned without any consideration for my feelings or our shared history. And I certainly wasn't going to sit home alone on May 15th, eating ice cream and pretending I didn't care while my sister celebrated the most important day of her life surrounded by people she deemed more worthy than her own family. Instead, I was going to do something I'd dreamed about for years but never had the courage to pursue. I was going to travel solo to Southeast Asia, specifically to Thailand, where I could spend 2 weeks exploring ancient temples, learning to cook authentic cuisine, and discovering what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than judged for who I wasn't. The more I researched, the more excited I became about this audacious plan that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. I found a small boutique hotel in Chiang Mai called the Lotus Garden Retreat, run by a British expat named Sarah who'd moved to Thailand 15 years earlier and created exactly the kind of welcoming, authentic experience I craved. The photos showed traditional teak buildings surrounded by lush gardens, with yoga pavilions overlooking rice paddies and cooking classes conducted in an open-air kitchen where guests learned to prepare meals using ingredients grown on the property. I spent hours reading reviews from solo female travelers who described transformative experiences, hiking through mountain villages where children greeted them with genuine smiles, learning meditation techniques from Buddhist monks who taught the art of finding peace within chaos, discovering their own strength while navigating unfamiliar cultures with nothing but curiosity and determination. These women wrote about returning home with expanded perspectives and unshakable confidence, having proven to themselves that they were capable of far more than they'd ever imagined. The financial reality was daunting but not impossible. I had been saving money for months, originally intending to contribute to Francesca's wedding festivities or perhaps help with a generous gift that would demonstrate my love and support. That fund, combined with my modest emergency savings and the small inheritance from grandmother Vivian that I'd been too sentimental to touch, would cover the entire trip with careful budgeting. It meant eating simple meals and choosing modest accommodations, but that seemed perfectly appropriate for someone seeking authentic experiences rather than luxury comfort. The next morning, I called in sick to work, the first dishonest thing I'd done in months, but I needed time to process this decision without the distraction of fourth-grade multiplication tables and spelling tests. I walked Buster through Willowbrook's historic district, past the antique shops and coffee houses where I'd spent countless weekend mornings reading and grading papers, seeing everything with fresh eyes that recognized how small and safe my world had become. At Thompson's travel agency on Main Street, Mrs. Patterson, who'd been booking family vacations since I was in elementary school, nearly dropped her coffee when I walked in requesting information about solo travel to Thailand. "Amelia honey, are you sure about this?" she asked with the concern of someone who'd known me since I was too shy to order my own ice cream cone. "Thailand is awfully far from home for a young lady traveling alone. Wouldn't you prefer something closer, maybe a nice tour group to Europe?" But I was absolutely certain, more certain than I'd been about anything in years. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I'm brave enough to explore the world on my own terms." Something in my voice must have convinced her of my determination because she spent the next 2 hours helping me plan an itinerary that would maximize both safety and adventure. The hardest part was telling our parents, a conversation I dreaded but knew couldn't be avoided. Mother's reaction was predictably dramatic, a string of concerns about safety, propriety, and what people would think about her unmarried daughter gallivanting around Asia like some kind of bohemian wanderer. "Amelia, darling, this seems awfully impulsive," she said during our Sunday dinner, her fork paused halfway to her mouth as if my announcement had disrupted her digestive process. "Surely you could find something more suitable closer to home? What about that lovely bed and breakfast in the Blue Ridge Mountains we visited last summer?" Father's response was more measured but equally skeptical. "Sweetheart, I appreciate your sense of adventure, but Thailand is a significant undertaking for someone without extensive travel experience. Perhaps you should consider joining an organized tour group, something with proper supervision and planned activities." The word supervision made me bristle with an indignation I hadn't expected. At 26 years old, with a college degree and a steady job, I was apparently still seen as someone who required supervision and guidance rather than being trusted to make my own decisions about my own life. The realization strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. "I've already booked the trip," I announced, the lie rolling off my tongue with surprising ease. "I leave in 3 weeks, the day before Francesca's wedding. I'll be in Chiang Mai learning to cook Thai cuisine while she's saying her vows at the Grand Rosewood Estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Mother's face cycled through several expressions: shock, disapproval, and finally something that might have been grudging admiration. Father set down his wine glass with the careful precision of someone buying time to formulate a response. "Amelia," Mother said finally, "are you doing this because you're upset about the wedding arrangements? Because if that's the case, perhaps we should discuss." "This has nothing to do with Francesca's wedding," I interrupted, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "This is about me finally doing something for myself, something that makes me happy instead of trying to fit into everyone else's expectations of who I should be." That evening, I actually did book the flights, my hands trembling as I entered my credit card information and committed to the most daring decision of my adult life. The confirmation email felt like a victory declaration, proof that I was capable of choosing adventure over comfort, growth over safety, my own dreams over other people's approval. Over the following weeks, as I prepared for departure with the methodical thoroughness that had always characterized my approach to important projects, I felt lighter than I had in years. Each item I packed, hiking boots that would carry me through mountain villages, sundresses that would breathe in tropical humidity, journals where I would record discoveries about myself and the world, represented freedom from the limitations that had defined my existence for too long. I was no longer Amelia, the overlooked sister, the one who wasn't pretty enough or sophisticated enough to merit inclusion in important family celebrations. I was becoming Amelia, the adventurer, the woman brave enough to explore the world alone and discover her own worth in the process. The transformation began the moment I stepped off the plane at Chiang Mai International Airport, enveloped by humid air that smelled of jasmine, street food, and possibilities I'd never imagined existed. After 27 hours of travel that included layovers in Chicago and Tokyo, I should have been exhausted, but instead I felt electrified by the sensory overload of a completely foreign world where nobody knew me as the plain sister or the disappointing daughter who couldn't measure up to family expectations. Sarah from the Lotus Garden retreat met me at arrivals with a hand-painted sign bearing my name in both English and Thai script, her sun-weathered face breaking into the kind of genuine smile I hadn't experienced in months. A former corporate lawyer from London who'd traded her pinstripe suits for flowing cotton dresses and elaborate silver jewelry, Sarah radiated the contentment of someone who'd discovered her authentic self after years of living according to other people's definitions of success. "Welcome to Thailand, love," she said in an accent that mixed British formality with the relaxed cadence of someone who'd learned to move at tropical rhythms. "I can already tell this is going to be a proper adventure for you. First time in Southeast Asia?" When I nodded, her smile widened. "Oh, you're in for a treat then. This country has a way of showing people who they really are underneath all the stories they've been telling themselves." The 40-minute drive to the retreat through winding mountain roads lined with ancient temples and terraced rice fields felt like entering a fairy tale designed specifically for someone who'd forgotten how to believe in magic. Water buffalo grazed in emerald paddies that reflected clouds like mirrors, while orange-robed monks walked along roadside paths with the unhurried grace of people who understood that the journey was more important than the destination. The Lotus Garden retreat itself exceeded every expectation I'd formed during weeks of research and daydreaming. Traditional teak buildings with carved wooden details rose on stilts above gardens where frangipani trees released their intoxicating perfume into air that seemed to shimmer with possibilities. My room, simple but elegant with mosquito netting draped over a comfortable bed and French doors opening onto a private balcony, felt like a sanctuary designed for healing and self-discovery. That first evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sun set over mountains that glowed like burnished copper, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so completely present in my own life. Back home in Willowbrook, I moved through each day on autopilot, teaching my students with genuine enthusiasm but returning each evening to an existence that felt somehow muted, as if I were viewing my own life through glass that dimmed all the colors. The cooking classes began the next morning in an open-air kitchen where Chef Siraporn, a tiny woman whose hands moved with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a dancer, taught me to prepare dishes that were symphonies of flavor unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "Cooking is meditation," she explained while demonstrating how to balance sweet, sour, salty, and spicy elements in perfect harmony. "You must taste, adjust, taste again. Trust your instincts, not just the recipe." As I learned to grind curry paste with a granite mortar and pestle older than my grandmother, chopping lemongrass and galangal while the morning sun filtered through bamboo screens, I felt something inside me awakening. These weren't just cooking techniques, they were lessons in trusting my own judgment, in believing that I could create something beautiful and nourishing with my own hands. The other guests at the retreat became an unexpected source of healing through their diverse stories of personal transformation. Margaret, a 60-year-old accountant from Melbourne, was celebrating her recent divorce from a husband who'd spent 30 years telling her she was too boring to travel anywhere interesting. James, a soft-spoken architect from Toronto, was processing the death of his partner and learning to navigate life alone after 20 years of couplehood. Maria, a young doctor from Sao Paulo, was taking her first vacation in 4 years, having finally admitted that her perfectionist tendencies were destroying her mental health. None of them saw me as the lesser sister or the woman who wasn't pretty enough for her own family's important events. They saw Amelia the adventurer, the brave soul who traveled halfway around the world to discover herself. Their acceptance felt like medicine for wounds I'd carried so long I'd forgotten they were injuries rather than permanent characteristics. The trekking expedition to remote mountain villages proved to be the crucible where my transformation accelerated beyond recognition. Following ancient paths through jungle that hummed with life, crossing rivers on bamboo bridges that swayed like hammocks, climbing to elevations where the air thinned and every breath required conscious effort. These physical challenges demanded a strength I'd never known I possessed. In the village of Ban Mae Kampong, where we spent 2 nights sleeping in traditional wooden houses and learning about sustainable farming practices, the children greeted me with curiosity untainted by judgment. They taught me games that required no common language, braided flowers in my hair with the same care Francesca had once shown, and included me in their daily adventures with the automatic acceptance that children offer before the world teaches them to evaluate people based on appearance or social status. An elderly woman named Niren, whose face was a map of lines earned through decades of mountain living, spent an entire afternoon teaching me to weave traditional patterns on a backstrap loom. Her hands, weathered by years of hard work but gentle as butterfly wings, guided mine through intricate movements that created beauty from simple threads. "Pretty comes from inside," she said in careful English while examining my clumsy first attempts. "When heart is happy, everything becomes beautiful." The meditation sessions with Fra David, a British monk who'd been living in Thai monasteries for 15 years, introduced me to the radical concept of self-compassion. Sitting in lotus position in a pavilion overlooking terraced gardens while the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I learned to observe my thoughts without judgment, to notice the constant stream of self-criticism that had become my internal soundtrack and gently redirect it toward kindness. "You've been carrying other people's opinions about your worth as if they were facts," he observed during one of our private conversations, his shaved head gleaming in the afternoon light. "But opinions are just thoughts, and thoughts can be changed. What if you decided to think different thoughts about yourself?" The photography workshop with Emma, an Australian travel blogger who specialized in capturing authentic cultural experiences, taught me to see beauty in unexpected places: weathered hands holding prayer beads, elderly women selling fruit from baskets balanced on their heads, children's faces illuminated by pure joy. But more importantly, she taught me to step out from behind the camera and allow myself to be photographed, to see my own face reflecting genuine happiness for the first time in years. "You light up when you laugh," Emma observed while reviewing the day's shots on her camera's LCD screen. "It's like watching someone remember who they really are underneath all the armor they've been wearing." As my 2 weeks in Thailand drew to a close, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with myself. The woman who'd boarded that plane in Richmond, cautious, self-doubting, defined by other people's limitations, was being replaced by someone I barely recognized but deeply admired. This new Amelia moved through the world with confidence earned through conquering fears, spoke with authority gained through trusting her own experiences, and radiated the kind of inner beauty that had nothing to do with conventional standards of attractiveness. On my final evening at the retreat, as fellow guests shared stories and contact information around a bonfire that crackled with possibility, I realized I wasn't just returning home with souvenirs and photographs. I was returning as a completely different person, someone who finally understood that her worth had never been determined by her sister's approval or her family's expectations. The question now was whether this new version of myself could survive re-entry into a world that had always insisted she wasn't enough. The confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure materialized exactly 1 week after my return from Thailand, in the most unexpected setting imaginable. I was at Henderson's Market on Saturday morning, selecting organic vegetables for the Thai-inspired stir-fry I'd planned to cook that evening, when I spotted Francesca near the imported cheese section. She looked immaculate as always, her honey blonde hair styled in the kind of effortless waves that required an hour of professional attention, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. What struck me immediately was how different I felt seeing her compared to our usual family encounters. Instead of the familiar shrinking sensation that typically accompanied Francesca's presence, I felt solidly grounded in my own skin, anchored by experiences and self-knowledge that couldn't be diminished by her particular brand of subtle warfare. The woman who'd learned to navigate Bangkok's chaotic markets and find her way through mountain villages without GPS wasn't going to be intimidated by a chance encounter in Willowbrook's upscale grocery store. "Amelia?" Francesca's voice carried genuine surprise mixed with something that might have been uncertainty. "When did you get back? Mother said you were traveling, but she was incredibly vague about the details." Her emerald eyes swept over me with the automatic assessment I'd grown accustomed to over the years, but this time I noticed her expression shift from casual evaluation to something approaching confusion. "I got back 3 days ago," I replied evenly, continuing to examine the bok choy with the kind of focused attention I'd learned from Chef Siraporn. I spent 2 weeks in Thailand, mostly in Chiang Mai and the surrounding mountain regions. It was exactly what I needed. The silence stretched between us while Francesca processed this information, clearly struggling to reconcile my calm demeanor with her expectations about how I should be responding to our last conversation. I could practically see her mental gears turning as she tried to determine whether I was angry, hurt, or simply indifferent to her wedding exclusion. Thailand, she repeated slowly, as if testing the word for hidden meanings. That seems awfully adventurous for you. I mean, traveling alone to such an exotic place. Were you part of some kind of tour group? The assumption that I couldn't possibly have managed such a journey independently was so perfectly Francesca that I almost smiled. No tour group, I said, moving on to examine fresh lemongrass with the kind of appreciation that came from understanding its culinary potential. I stayed at a small retreat center, took cooking classes, did some trekking in remote villages, learned meditation from Buddhist monks. It was transformative. That last word hung in the air between us like a challenge, and I watched Francesca's carefully composed expression flicker with something that looked almost like alarm. The sister she'd left behind had been predictable, controllable, easily diminished by casual cruelty disguised as concern. This version, radiating quiet confidence while discussing adventure travel and spiritual practices, didn't fit her established narrative about our respective roles. Well, she said finally, her voice taking on that bright, artificial tone she used when struggling to maintain conversational control, I'm sure it was very educational. Though I have to say, you look different. Did you do something to your hair? The question was clearly meant to redirect our conversation toward appearance and criticism, familiar territory where Francesca held all the advantages. But instead of the usual anxiety that accompanied her aesthetic evaluations, I felt only mild amusement at her transparent attempt to regain the upper hand. I learned to braid it in traditional Thai styles, I said, unconsciously touching the intricate pattern I'd woven that morning, taught by children in a mountain village who treated my hair like precious silk worthy of artistic attention. Amazing what you can discover about yourself when you're not constantly being told what you lack. The comment was deliberate, a gentle but unmistakable reference to years of accumulated criticism, and Francesca's face flushed slightly as she recognized the challenge embedded in my response. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, I had claimed the conversational high ground without raising my voice or descending to accusations. Amelia, if this is about the wedding situation, she began, her voice taking on that familiar tone of patient explanation she used when addressing what she perceived as my oversensitivity, I hope you understand that it really wasn't personal. Planning a wedding at this level involves so many complex considerations. Actually, Francesca, I interrupted gently but firmly, your wedding gave me exactly the gift I needed. Being excluded forced me to examine why I'd been waiting my entire adult life for your approval instead of creating a life that made me happy. So thank you for that clarity. The words emerged with a calm authority that surprised even me, each syllable weighted with conviction earned through temple meditation and mountain hiking, through learning to trust my own judgment and value my own experiences. Francesca's mouth opened slightly, clearly preparing a response that never materialized as she struggled to process this unexpected reversal of power dynamics. I don't think you understand the pressure Harrison and I were under, she continued after a moment, her voice carrying the first notes of defensiveness I'd ever heard from her. His family has certain expectations about social presentation, professional networking opportunities. The guest list alone required months of strategic planning. I understand perfectly, I said, selecting a bunch of Thai basil with the kind of confident appreciation that came from knowing exactly how I intended to use it. You prioritized social advancement over family relationships. That's a choice you're entitled to make, but it's also a choice I'm entitled to respond to by building a life that doesn't revolve around your approval. The market's Saturday morning bustle continued around us, families selecting produce for weekend meals, elderly couples debating dinner plans, teenagers helping with shopping lists, but our conversation had created a bubble of tension that felt separate from the ordinary world surrounding us. You're being dramatic, Francesca said finally, her voice carrying the edge of frustration that emerged when her usual manipulation tactics failed to achieve their intended effect. This isn't about approval or family dynamics. This is about practical wedding planning decisions that you're taking personally when they were never meant that way. Perhaps, I agreed with a serenity that clearly unnerved her, but the result is the same regardless of your intentions. I've learned to find my value from sources that don't depend on your assessment of my worthiness. For a long moment, we stood facing each other across a display of imported vegetables, two sisters who had shared a childhood but had become strangers divided by fundamental differences in how they define success, beauty, and family loyalty. Francesca's perfect composure was showing hairline cracks, tiny fissures in her confidence that suggested she was beginning to realize that her power to diminish me had somehow evaporated during my 2 weeks abroad. "The wedding was beautiful, by the way," she said finally, attempting to reassert control through what I recognized as a calculated attempt to remind me of what I'd missed. "Everything went exactly as planned. Harrison's business associates were incredibly impressed, and we've already received 3 magazine offers for the photo spreads." "I'm genuinely happy for you," I replied, and meant it with a sincerity that seemed to catch her off guard. "I hope your marriage brings you all the joy and fulfillment you deserve. And I hope you'll understand that I've finally learned to create my own version of happiness that doesn't require anyone else's permission or approval." The conversation ended there, not with dramatic declarations or emotional confrontations, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally learned to value herself enough to stop fighting for scraps of affection from people who had never truly seen her worth. As I walked away, my market basket filled with ingredients for adventures yet to be created, I felt lighter than I had in years. The months following my return from Thailand unfolded like chapters in a book I was finally writing for myself rather than according to someone else's plot outline. The woman who had once measured her worth by her sister's approval was gradually being replaced by someone who drew strength from internal sources that couldn't be diminished by external criticism or family dynamics rooted in decades of misguided assumptions about beauty, success, and sisterly obligation. My 4th grade classroom became a laboratory for the confidence I discovered among Thai mountain villages and Buddhist temples. Students who had previously seen me as a kind but unremarkable teacher began responding to an energy I didn't fully recognize in myself, a quiet authority that came from knowing my own worth rather than seeking validation from others. When 8-year-old Marcus struggled with reading comprehension, I found myself channeling the patient wisdom of Chef Siraporn, breaking complex concepts into manageable pieces while maintaining unwavering faith in his eventual success. "Mrs. Henderson, you seem different this year," observed Emma Chen, one of my brightest students, during a quiet moment between lessons. "You smile more, and your eyes look happy even when you're not smiling." The innocence of her observation hit me with unexpected force, confirming that my transformation was visible to people who had no investment in maintaining old narratives about who I was supposed to be. The cooking classes I began offering at the Willowbrook Community Center every Thursday evening attracted an eclectic group of food enthusiasts eager to learn the Thai techniques I'd mastered during my travels. Standing before a room of 20 adults, demonstrating how to balance sweet, sour, salty, and spicy elements while sharing stories about market vendors in Chiang Mai and meditation practices learned from orange-robed monks, I discovered a version of myself that was both teacher and storyteller, confident in knowledge earned through personal experience rather than academic study. Margaret Whitmore, a retired librarian whose husband had recently passed away, became one of my most devoted students and eventually a genuine friend. "You've given me permission to try things that scared me," she told me after successfully preparing her first green curry from scratch. "If you can travel to Thailand alone and come back glowing like this, maybe I can finally take that pottery class I've been dreaming about for 30 years. Her words reminded me that transformation was contagious, that stepping into our own power gave others permission to do the same. The photography hobby I developed under Emma's guidance in Thailand evolved into something approaching artistic expression. Weekend hiking trips through Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, once solitary escapes from family expectations, became opportunities to capture beauty in unexpected places, morning mist rising from valley floors, elderly faces illuminated by farmers' market conversations, children's hands covered in paint during community art projects. Several local businesses began commissioning my work for their marketing materials, providing both supplemental income and validation that my perspective had value in the commercial world. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with romantic possibility. Daniel Morrison, the father of one of my students and recently divorced veterinarian who volunteered at the same animal shelter where I'd spent countless teenage hours, began appearing at my cooking classes with increasing frequency. Unlike the men I'd previously dated, choices influenced by unconscious attempts to prove my worth to Francesca through association with her type of successful, conventionally attractive partners, Daniel appreciated qualities I'd learned to value in myself. "I love watching you teach," he said after a particularly successful evening where we prepared an elaborate Thai feast for the entire class. "You light up when you're sharing something you're passionate about. It's like watching someone completely comfortable in their own skin." His observation, delivered without agenda or expectation, felt like recognition rather than flattery, acknowledgement of authentic qualities rather than superficial attributes. Our courtship unfolded with the unhurried pace of people who had learned to trust their own judgment rather than rushing toward predetermined goals. Weekend mornings at the farmer's market, selecting ingredients for collaborative cooking experiments. Evening walks through Willowbrook's historic district while discussing books, travel dreams, and the small daily miracles that made ordinary life extraordinary. Quiet dinners where conversation flowed as naturally as breathing, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt like contentment rather than awkwardness. The contrast with my previous relationships was startling in its simplicity. Daniel's appreciation for my intellect, humor, and adventurous spirit created space for me to be authentically myself rather than constantly calculating how to become more appealing according to someone else's standards. When he told me I was beautiful, the compliment felt like recognition of something that encompassed far more than physical appearance, a radiance that came from living according to my own values rather than seeking external validation. Family dinners remained challenging but no longer devastating. Mother's comments about my unconventional lifestyle choices, and father's gentle suggestions about finding more suitable social circles rolled off me with the ease of someone who had learned to distinguish between opinion and truth. When Francesca and Harrison visited for Thanksgiving, their polished perfection seemed less intimidating than it had in previous years, more like a carefully constructed performance than an authentic expression of happiness. "Amelia seems different," I overheard Harrison telling father during their post-dinner conversation in the library. "More confident, more present somehow. That trip to Thailand must have been quite an experience." His observation, delivered without condescension or surprise, suggested that even within our family's established hierarchies, people were beginning to recognize my transformation as genuine rather than temporary rebellion. The anniversary of my Thailand trip arrived with an invitation that perfectly illustrated how much had changed in my relationship with adventure and self-determination. Sarah from the Lotus Garden Retreat had written to invite me back as a guest instructor for their new Courage and Culinary Arts program, designed for women seeking transformative travel experiences. The opportunity to share my story with other women navigating their own journeys towards self-acceptance felt like the universe offering confirmation that my growth had been authentic and sustainable. As I prepared for this return journey, packing with the confidence of someone who knew she could navigate unfamiliar territory and return stronger than before, I reflected on the unexpected gift Francesca had given me through her wedding exclusion. Being rejected by someone whose approval I'd spent decades seeking had forced me to examine the foundation of my self-worth and rebuild it on more solid ground. The greatest lesson hadn't been about sisterly relationships or family dynamics, though those had certainly evolved in healthier directions. It had been about the freedom that comes from refusing to accept other people's limitations as facts about our own potential. I had learned to distinguish between love that required me to diminish myself and love that celebrated my authentic growth, between relationships that drained my energy and those that amplified my natural radiance. If you're watching this story unfold and recognizing your own struggles with family members who seem determined to keep you small, remember that their inability to see your worth says nothing about your actual value. Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones least equipped to witness our transformation into our fullest selves, not because they're intentionally cruel, but because our growth threatens their understanding of how relationships should work. Your beauty, intelligence, worthiness, and potential for adventure aren't determined by anyone else's assessment or invitation list. You don't need permission to create a life that makes you happy, to travel to places that call to your spirit, or to become the version of yourself that you've always known was possible. The world needs your authentic light, not your perfect performance of someone else's expectations. Trust me on this, the view from your own life, lived on your own terms, is absolutely breathtaking. Have you ever had to choose between family approval and personal growth? What did that journey teach you about your own strength? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button if this resonated with your own path towards self-acceptance. You are worthy of taking up space in this world exactly as you are, and your story is just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.